Hi HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today we're joined by Donovan Mattole, Vice President of HR North America at Brenntag Group. Donovan, welcome to the show. How are you?
Great. Thanks, Chris. Good to be here.
Thanks for waking up really early.
Hey, there's the pond, the difference in the time zones.
Tell everyone what time it is where you are.
Yeah, hey, it's early, but we're good. I have my coffee.
Oh, you got your coffee, you're fine. Yeah. I was just saying to the guys, to Donovan, before the show, I was like, I don't think I could be in the office at 7:30. So I definitely got to salute you for that.
Hey, it keeps the door closed.
It's true. Donovan, before we jump in, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself personally.
Oh, wow.
Your career journey and personal journey to where we are today.
How much time do we have, Chris? No, that's definitely the story. So, going back, I would just share briefly one of the unique things about my childhood is my parents were in New York City. Briefly went to Ibiza, Spain, and then moved out to San Francisco at the height of the hippie movement. So I grew up on an organic cannabis farm without electricity or hot water or telephone. So that's where I spent the first 18 years of my life, and definitely formative. So
did you have one of those like VW camper vans as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Amazing. Very, very, very unique. And tell me a bit more about the journey. How did you find HR and, where you've been until you ended up now at Brenntag?
So I went to school in Chicago and then continued on graduate school in Jerusalem. I wanted to be a professor of Middle Eastern studies.
Wow. Okay. Very unique. That's the first. That's the first.
It's one of those journeys. One of the things I'd say is a lot of people say they just fell into HR. I always knew about HR. My grandfather was the head of personnel for Johnson & Johnson and was a leader in training and development in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so I always knew of this career in HR where a lot of people hadn't heard of it, but it was definitely not my path or journey. And I had worked at bookstores through college. And I dropped out of graduate school. We had a baby and moved back to Portland, Oregon, and ended up getting hired at Borders Books and Music as a store manager and ran 4 different stores over the next 6 years. Loved being a manager, but got into training all the new managers. So in retail, you probably know, but a lot of times the training program is a new manager goes and spends time with an experienced manager. Mm-hmm. So I did that. And after 9 Christmases, listening to Christmas music in retail, I said, you know what? I don't think I want to be a retail manager forever.
You had enough of that album, the Christmas album that plays every year. Like, I can't listen.
Yeah, it's the same songs you hear every year. And you're like, okay, this is great. But, after 9 years. And so I was hired in Borders as one of their first regional HR managers, which was like a business partner, and had the West Coast of the United States from Hawaii to Alaska to Colorado. Beautiful areas, loved it, opened 16 stores with Borders and kind of ran HR for 10 states. And that was my beginning of HR. And so I've been doing it for a long time. So
how did that work then? You just expressed you were looking for a different career journey. They kind of looked at your passion for training new leaders, managers in the business, and then saw that was a fit within this new HR role. Is that kind of how that conversation happened?
Absolutely. So the head of HR, Dan Smith, there was a new book called HR Champions. This is in 2000 and by Dave Ulrich. Yeah. And he was transforming HR. And so was looking at the business and created these regional business partners, very innovative at the time. And so he completely redid the department and hired externally these HR partners. And they took a chance on me and one other person who had never been in HR. I'd been doing HR, running a store of 50 employees, but never had the functional kind of experience. And so,
but that can all be taught. This is what I love about.
Oh, absolutely.
Your manager took that. I don't even see that as a risk. Like because you've already demonstrated that. You've demonstrated it already.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I've looked for in business partners. So I've hired business partners right out of MBA programs, hired them right out of the business, because you have those leadership skills and you have the business skills. I mean, that's the harder thing to gain than what are the legal requirements in the state of California.
One of the things that I loved last time I spoke with Donovan, guys, before the show, was he showed me in the background his kitchen wall. And for everyone on the podcast, we'll try and describe it for you. But can you describe the photo that's on the frame that's on the wall behind your desk?
So, I pointed out the nerdiness in me. One day I was looking and saw that I had every business card from every job since college. And so, I said, wow, 4 companies over the last 20 years and, more than 20 years, I guess 25 years, I'm aging myself. And so I just kind of put them around the company logos.
I love that. And as Donovan mentioned, for everyone listening, it's basically a frame on the wall for everyone who can't see it, with all of the business cards displayed and the logos of those companies. That's so unique, and it kind of tells everyone a bit about you and your journey, and it's a story in its own. So I love that idea. Like I don't have all the business cards in my previous roles, but if I did, I'll certainly be creating something similar. And it's also a reminder for you that how far you've come and all of those different experiences that you've had along the way, right? So that's
all the mistakes I've made along the
way. Why?
Don't do that. Okay.
What's really occupying your mind on a day-to-day basis at the moment?
Yeah. I mean, we're in a transformational journey in HR. So, one of the things that's exciting about coming into this company is we're a global company, but we've grown through acquisition. And we're very decentralized in the past, which makes us very entrepreneurial, close to the customer. We can really drive results, and that's been our success. But what we're looking at now is how do we put in a lot of these processes that we haven't done? And so you may be great in one little spot of the country, but another spot is not the same from a consistency. So whether it's talent or learning, leadership, engagement, just the overall cultural journey. That's what we're working on. And it's exciting. It's an exciting time. And I would say the biggest thing for me has been thinking differently. So every company is different. Every company, just like every person, has a different story. And so I can't take the tricks that I learned on those business cards in the past, or failed on those business cards, and just say, let me apply that to my new company. I have to really think about, what is the journey that Brenntag is on? Where are we? What is our culture? And what fits for our industry? And you have to do that with every company.
Yeah, I've seen that happen. Following our first conversation that we had, Donovan, I was thinking about past experiences and speaking to HR leaders. And one of the CEOs, I won't mention the name because it's quite a sensitive subject. He mentioned he hired a CHRO recently. And I was asking him, have you ever had to let go of a CHRO before as a CEO? Because I was wondering what that conversation would look like, etc. And he was saying to me, the CHRO that he hired had worked in the same company for about 20 years. And it was a very large, established, well-known organization. We would all know the name, but I'm not going to put it out there. She then moved into a very unstable, very fast-moving business, or very entrepreneurial and a lot of disruption, and just really struggled. And obviously, they ended up having to let her go. And it kind of goes back to your point, because he was saying she tried to take the same approach and processes that worked in that business that she'd been at for 20 years and into our organization, which is very entrepreneurial, disruptive, and it just didn't work. Yeah. And it was no fault onto her own, because in any other environment, that would be an incredible strategy and that would work amazingly. But as you just said, it doesn't always work, and it's not always transferable into organizations. You really have to adapt depending on the business and the leaders that you move into, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you heard the saying, past performance is the best indicator of future performance. And it's a mantra that we say in HR all the time. We're like, okay, well, you don't need to have that coaching session, but be aware past performance is the best indicator of future performance. And when we're interviewing and when we're hiring and when we're looking for talent, we're always kind of looking at what have they done? What's the history? But one of the things I like to think about is kind of turn that and think about the fact that your best practices and the things you did at previous companies are not necessarily the best things in the future. So while performance, you may see it repeat itself, just hiring the same people that work for you in all of your previous companies might not be the best. Now, it could be the best.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah.
And we could talk about that. And that thing you did at the previous company could be the best, but you really have to think about it and say, what do we need now? Performance, engagement, talent, whatever it is, analytics, what works in one company might not work in yours.
Yeah, and in the context of the current business, it might not fit within that. I've seen it with sales. Again, I'm just speaking from personal experience. I've seen it from salespeople. So traditionally, you think, as a sales director, I would hire experienced salespeople. It would make sense that they really high performing salespeople at one company, they'd be the same. I actually found that most of the time it was the opposite. And there's a few factors. One is that I would spend so much time there and having to retrain those people to operate in our sales process. Right. That it almost took more time. I may as well have just hired someone with the right attitude and the ability to learn and just train them. It would have taken less time. And a lot of the most experienced salespeople had settled in those companies. So they had that client list that they already had that they relied on every year, for example. They had that team of people that were around them that were supporting them. There were so many different factors that made that person successful in that previous role that when they move to a new company, they don't have the list of previous clients they had before where they, made that consistent revenue. They don't have those relationships in that particular industry anymore. Again, the relationships internally, there's so many factors that I realized that come into play when you're hiring, someone who on paper looks the perfect fit based on their experience into your organization as well. And I found, honestly, I got to the point where I just started hiring people just based on their attitude and the ability to learn and just train them our way as a business, as opposed to trying to retrain someone who already had been working in the company for 10 years. That's very hard.
No, it's so true. And the same goes for leadership. So, you get to be a CHRO or a head of HR, and you're looking at hiring that new general manager or hiring a president or hiring a COO. And it's so easy to go, let's look at the industry and someone that's come up and they've been a head of finance and then they were a CFO and now let's put them in a CEO position, or, they come up through sales. And I like to think of it differently and say, let's think fresh. We live in there's that phrase, the VUCA world, which is volatile, ambiguous, complex. And what have they done to show their adaptability? And different functions really build leadership, because your development comes from going out and doing something different. So, hey, they did a sales role and were very successful, but then they transitioned to a corporate development role and then they went into operations briefly. Those are the kind of leaders that I get excited about. They worked in a couple different industries. They did a startup, or they turned this company around, or they had this global experience. That excites me. It's different than just always, hey, they had a series of progressing leadership roles in the same function in the same company.
Yeah, and I see that trend all the time with very senior HR leaders that come on the show. They've worked in so many different areas of the business in so many different regions. So by the time they become a CHRO, they've worked in the Middle East for a time. They've worked in a different region. They've worked in supply chain outside of HR, nothing to do with HR. They've gone and worked into supply chain for a few years, and then to sales and marketing. And then when they become a CEO or CHRO, they're so much more well-rounded. And by just looking at their background that they're adaptable. And when it comes to, as you mentioned, this VUCA world, those are the leaders that we need in our organizations that have been able to adapt and pivot as well. And again, I'm going back to sales, this is my own experience. When I'm looking at a CV for a potential sales hire, I look at where the areas that they've stepped outside of their comfort zone. An example being, if I've seen someone that's moved from another country to seek a job in the UK, that's already a positive sign for me. That person was willing to leave their country, leave their friends, leave their families to pursue a career in the UK, in London. I already know that person's got some resilience in what they do. Or whether they have a sporting background, for example, where they're very competitive and they've experienced a lot of failure and success. There's so many different things you look for, but I think in this new world of work, the leaders that we hire, I think that they need to show those signs of being able to adapt. And as you mentioned before, all of these skills, hard and soft skills, are transferable.
Yeah.
different functions and different,
Yeah.
and it's not just, just within HR. And also lastly, to retain those people, I think you have to now give them the opportunity.
Right. Right. Yeah,
They're
you
not going
have
to.
to give them different experiences. I mean, people leave, there's the old saying, they don't leave companies, they leave line managers, which again, all of these are true for a reason, but they also leave companies because they're not given challenges. They're
Yeah.
not given those other experiences. So, it's a two-pronged approach. I think, while employees need to own their development, and we talk about that, and leaders sometimes say to me, Donovan, well, they need to own it. Yeah. But it's also our job as HR and as leaders to make sure we're giving those opportunities to great potential.
Yeah. So what things are you looking for from when you was hiring leaders in the past to where we are now with this sort of VUCA world that we're living in? What things are you looking for that's different than what you were looking before when you talk about hiring leaders?
Well, I mentioned it before, but that resilience piece.
Mm-hmm.
So dealing with ambiguity is, I think, a big one. And how have they responded in the past to different experiences? So I want to actually see it. So I think the competencies are important. Can they navigate complex challenges? How are they with conflict? How are they with managing a vision? But also the experiences they've had. Because that's really kind of proven it out. So have they put themselves in a turnaround situation and failed? That's okay. How have they responded to that? Have they moved, like I said, cross-functionally, or your point, went to a different country and did something totally different? Because there's so much learning that happened with that. There's so much ambiguity that happened to them that they're going to bring that fresh perspective. So to their role. So I love that kind of cross-functional learning in leaders. I want to find enough of a background that matches what we're looking for. I'm not going to risk
Sure. Yeah, sure.
But at the same time, the variety there is critical. So
yeah. And how have you embedded this into your recruitment process in some way to identify people that have that? Because I suppose it's quite difficult unless you are, if you look at traditional recruiting technology and models, it's not going to be able to identify what we just discussed. Unless there's something out there that I don't know about that is
tools. We all have the same tools. Right?
Yeah, it's what I mean.
Innovative stuff happening, but we all go to LinkedIn and we look for the experience. I take partners. That's, at a senior level. So, I have some third-party recruiting partners who are really, really good, and they understand what we're looking for. The other thing I do is sometimes I put my name out there and with my peers on the executive team and say, hey, give me a chance. Let me look externally. Let me bring forward some candidates who I think might fit. And then let's talk to them and then make a decision. And so I built that trust level with the COOs and the CEO that they're willing to say, okay, let's go, let's find it. And then we may end up with that internal who is perfect for the role and the right fit, which should be the majority of the time if we're doing our succession planning right. But there's a lot of times where we bring in someone new that has some fresh perspective. So I think there's a balance there. But looking on my own or through a third party at kind of what is that background that candidate has.
Well, as you said, you have to have a combination of both, because if everyone in your organization is just a reflection of someone else, then there's not going to be much innovation happening there.
Not to mention diversity.
Exactly.
And, new thinking, but
How are you making sure that, are you making sure that a company, other people that in different departments can also apply for these roles despite it being completely separate? Is that something you guys do as well?
Yeah, so every company, like I said, is a journey, and we are kind of on that path. So we've operated in a very fragmented world, which has been very good for the business. So we're in the middle of a major implementation of an HR tool that will connect talent all around the world. We're in 75 countries, and so it's really exciting. So we'll have that up and running by the end of the year, and whether it's in South Africa, Asia or here in the United States or Canada, employees will see it. So we're excited. So it's
That's really exciting times for you as well, right? Because you're going to be able to see all of these different skills that exist in your business. Like it's like a really cool. that on its own is just so exciting. I'm excited for you because I think so many organizations, especially at the scale of your own, that operate in the current matrix and model that you operate in, there's positives and negatives to it, like you said. The positive is that you're very much entrepreneurial, and you can move quicker because you're not constrained by a global centralized strategy, budget, processes, red tape, etc. It can move quickly, but at the same time, the negative is that you can't really have, or obviously you're developing now, that wider reach and visibility of the whole business and the talent that exists.
Well, we don't want to lose that entrepreneurial employee ownership. That's one of our core values.
It has to be a balance though, right?
And so we want to have that kind of balance where we're still the speed to customer, creating value for the customer, thinking customer first, but at the same time, we're leveraging our talent because we're in a global business and it's competitive, and we need to make sure we're doing that. So yeah, there's this balance, but it is, to your point, very exciting. It's an exciting time.
Well, on that point then, how do you approach implementing HR strategy across such a large region then? That on its own is a whole nother challenge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one of the things that I did, and we talk about the first 90 days, it's a great book, but more than any other company I worked for, I had to build those relationships. So my first 6 months here, my first 3 months, I went out and I traveled across the entire United States and Canada, and met with every one of our presidents. So we have, 12 different businesses. And so I met with the presidents and the executive teams and 50 people, and just build a relationship, got to know where their pain points were, what's working, what's not working. Then when we came together and said, okay, here's our strategy, and we did a 5-year kind of roadmap, it was something they bought in, and it was really fun. I'll just tell you, when we had that first strategy meeting and I said, here's all the topics and all the things that I heard from you that we can do. And I gave all of these presidents little dots, red, white, and green, and just said, put the dots on where you think we should go. And you had presidents that have been with the company 30 years arguing, no, that should be under talent. That should be under planning.
That's great.
Give me your dot. And they're like wrestling in the group. And, so people say, hey, do your leaders buy into that? This is cultural transformation, and they're losing a little bit of their kind of independence as you harmonize things. And, and the answer is absolutely, because they had a voice in kind of building the strategy. So it's great to have that alignment.
Yeah, it's a great point you make, but I want to emphasize to everyone listening, that's, in my opinion, and let's speak to our leaders, that's the only way you can do it, is by getting out of your office, going to speak to them individually. There's no quick way, guys. There's no email broadcast. There's no internal memo. Even a phone call or a video call, I think that, in these situations, especially when, as you mentioned, you just started, you have to build that trust and relationship with those, and actually genuinely understand what motivates and those individuals before even making any type of change, because they're not going to be bought into it otherwise. So they have to feel like they're included in that process.
It's a core part of the change strategy, but it's also helped me in doing that. Learn the company.
Exactly.
Because it was very easy to go, hey, head of HR, here's what I did at my previous company. And this is the policies we had, and this is how we did succession planning, and this is how we looked at talent. But what I had to do is step back and go, no, this is different. Every company is different. Where is Brenntag? What's their story? And, a lot of those things in the strategy are core HR stuff, so that we're all doing, but we're doing it differently and implementing it differently.
Yeah. And I love the idea about when you brought everyone together for the kickoff meeting with the pins, because I guarantee you, they learned so much more about each other in that meeting than they ever did. Just by those moments of everyone putting their pins up. They go, oh, that's what you think that should be, or that's your opinion on, X, Y, and Z. because the way you almost gamified it.
Absolutely. We did.
In a way to do that, right? And all of a sudden they probably can identify 3 or 4 or 5 people in the room that really align with their beliefs and their direction of organization. So there's so much more that's coming from that approach. So what about, I think we touched on it already a little bit, but what about hiring people that you previously worked with? We're talking about, creating a different, bespoke approach to each organization.
No, I like
sometimes people can bring in too many of their previous colleagues they worked with before to try and create what already existed in the previous company. What's your approach been personally for your own team? I'm referring to, by the way.
Yeah, so I would say it's a balance. So I've heard both sides, right? I've heard people say, I never rehire, right? And I'm like, really? You never rehire for, this is for your own team in HR. No, I want to think differently. And I would disagree with that, because I think sometimes your best people, you know them, you trust them, you know what their opportunities are, what their strengths are, and you can kind of speed along and jump much farther into kind of that transformation. So I've had great success, and shout out to those in HR that I've brought through different companies. But at the same time, some of my best employees and some of the people that have been the most transformational and that I've learned the most for are people I've never worked with. And so, what I say is, just because someone was successful at your last company doesn't mean they're going to be successful at your new company. So you have to think uniquely, what do you need? What are we going to get? And is this an opportunity, again, to bring in someone that has skills that you're going to learn from or that will transform the business, and not just bring in from the past? One last thing is, I would say, when you do bring in that person, make sure that's someone that is going to really learn the business and build the relationships and think differently. So you may know that they have a high drive for results, or they're detail oriented, and so you want them by your side. But you also want to make sure they're not just going to bring their own old toolbox as well.
Yeah, and that's a fine balance to have. And I'm a direct reflection of what you just said. As half of my employees are previous colleagues.
Okay,
and I knew that by collaborating with Shane, who's my co-founder, that we both can have a very strong foundation of sales immediately off the bat. I knew that bringing in Will, our head of production, means that our product development is going to be great, because again, I've trained and developed him, worked with him in the past, so I kind of already can delegate that with a lot of confidence. So again, it allowed us to scale the business. And then similar with Ivan, who's a good friend of mine who taught me how to video edit, that I knew that he will be a perfect person for me to work with, as he's always curious to break the mold and experiment and innovate, that he would be a perfect fit. Despite the fact he's never worked in this industry, I knew that his editing and digital skills would be perfectly transferable into creating this podcast and creating the videos and the content that we have. I could have spent months looking, interviewing, recruiting, obviously going through, but in the space of 6 months, we kind of gone from 0 to where we are now as well. So but now I'm in that position where I need the unique sets of skills in the organizations that I don't have in my talent pool that I really need. And I do need people to challenge. I need people to challenge my own thinking, to push me. Otherwise, that's something I honestly beg for a lot of times. Because sometimes if you're only making the decisions your way, you kind of, I want to disrupt my own thinking and myself, because I know there's a lot more that could be had, and there's another gear that I can step into. But I do need people around me that can challenge me. And sometimes if you hire people that already know you, that you're comfortable with, they don't really push you and challenge you as much. As well. So
that's actually, I looked down. I'm reading this book called
Radical Candor. It's a great book.
So it just speaks. And I just handed it. I just bought copies for all of our executives and just said, this is the culture we want to create at this company. And so I'm really excited.
A lot of recommendations for that book, by the way. So many people I've spoken to have recommended that book.
Really?
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of people, again, a lot of the CHRO CEOs I speak to, they complain about that to me offline, outside of the podcast, outside of the conversation. Like, Chris, man, I don't have anyone in my team that challenges. I'm like, because you hired everyone that looks like you and that thinks like you around you. So there's no diverse thought around you, so that, and people aren't willing to challenge you, and also you haven't opened up and showed them that you want that feedback and that you're open
I
to
think
that feedback as well. I say to the team all the time, like, we have a meeting nearly every single day in the morning where we talk about what can we do better. And a lot of times they're my ideas that I come out with, and they're like, no, we shouldn't do it that way. And here's why, Chris. And this is what it means for the company. I'm like, great. Why didn't you say that before? like, I really want that. I think a lot of leaders are hungry for that, but they're not necessarily giving off the right signals or surrounding themselves with the right people to achieve that.
Good.
What else is on your mind, Donovan?
Oh, there's so much going on. But no, I think I would say think differently. I mean, this isn't rocket science. This is all about the people. So think about your company. What is unique about your company? What do you want to do now? What's the next best step? So when you think of the roadmap, so right now I have this 5-year roadmap and journey. And so some things build to the next. And so there's things that I want to do. So when I think of like data analytics, I just was at a HR analytics conference and talked about artificial intelligence and all kinds of really fun stuff. I get excited about it because it's going to transform HR. But I also have to say, hey, we have to have all the data. We have to put that in the data lake. And so there's steps that we need to do before we can do that. So what's the next best step for your company? And that's one of the things I have to constantly remind myself. I'm like, performance management, there's so many innovative things happening right now. But some of our managers have never really been trained on how to give feedback. How to do it in a productive way, how to have coaching, how to set goals, some traditional stuff that people are like, oh, that's boring.
Before you go in all these shiny new objects that are out there. Yeah, it's a good point. And by the way, you made a big point on the analytics thing, because the number one, whenever I speak to VPs, directors of people analytics, I say, what's the first thing we should focus on? They're like, forget about all of the technology. Forget about all this. If your data is not clean and you don't have the data in place to go into the system, then it's irrelevant. You can have the best tools in the world, right? But it's funny how those are the basic fundamentals. Forget about AI and artificial intelligence, and predictive, prescriptive analytics.
You're going to be pulling out crazy things. You're going to be like, wait, only white men are successful. No, your data's all wrong. You don't have the right data in there. Bad data in is bad data out. But at the end of the day, what does the customer want? And I think innovative HR is going beyond just, okay, let me understand our business, but really going ahead and saying, okay, who are our customers? I recently set up meetings. I asked the CFO, give me our top 10 customers and top 10 suppliers. And then I started reaching out on LinkedIn to them and saying, hey, let's get together for lunch. Let's talk about what our challenges are and your challenges are, so that as I'm sitting in that executive team, I can be like, oh yeah, I met with their CHRO recently. Here's the challenge they're facing. So it's
That's fantastic.
Probably goes back to my retail days. Joe, you're in here for your latest mystery novel. Here's the books that have come out, and you kind of get to know their interests. So really going ahead at the global scale, what are our customer needs? So
I think there'll be a lot. I think people will be very, very surprised at what they hear from their customers when they have those conversations that they didn't expect. And then you can really bring that back into your team.
And driving it through the organization. We had an employment branding value proposition meeting last week. And one of the business partners said, hey, I can't be there because I'm visiting one of our top customers. And I was like, absolutely.
Oh, no, don't go. Sorry, it's not important. You have to be here at this meeting.
No, you need to be here talking about our value proposition from an employment branding standpoint. One last story is one of our chief marketing officers, general managers at my previous company. We were in a cost-cutting mode and trying to look at everything, from a dollar, travel, expenses, et cetera. And we were looking at a new agency to bring on from a marketing perspective. And so the president said, I really don't think the whole marketing team should go. You should only send one person bring only one person with you. And she was like, okay, then I need to bring my HR business partner. And I was like, this is where we know we've arrived. When she was bumping the marketing director and other people in marketing to go meet with a new branding agency because that business partner was so aligned with her, knew her thinking so much, even though marketing wasn't his function. And so we were giving each other high fives and we're like, okay, that's what it means to be a business partner.
I'd love to be in that moment.
Yeah.
I'd love to be in there. Oh, wow. Yeah.
So,
And as I said, that's why we need to get away from the whole HR business partner. This is a business partner. You don't say finance business partner or marketing business partner or any other function, supply chain business partner. But for some reason that we've kind of downgraded HR to like HR business partner. Look, Donovan, you've provided some great insights and value for our audience. I really appreciate you taking the time out to join us on the show. It's
absolutely, a lot of fun.
I certainly know our listeners have learned a lot from the time having you on here. This leads us quite nicely onto the quick fire round.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you 5 questions.
5.
And you have no longer than 30 seconds to give us some amazing answers.
Oh, no.
Are you ready?
I don't know, but shoot. I think slow.
Yeah, this is where we just catch everyone off guard. We don't prepare anyone because that way it's going to be truly authentic. Okay. What was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming a senior HR leader?
I think my style is very casual, laid back. And then I realized, and I always said that was me. That's me. I'm a laid back, casual kind of guy. And I realized, no, there's times to kind of put that professional suit on and have that presence because, those first impressions are so critical. And so I'd say that was one thing that I had to realize that, yeah, you can still be you in a suit and a tie. So,
yeah, I can relate to that. That's something I struggled with, that balance when I first became a manager. Wow. What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
I would say think customer first. And just that employee life cycle, that chain, customer and employee, all of those things are tied together. So if you're just thinking about your business, you're really going to lose it. But you've got to think about your employee, which impacts the customer.
The entire journey. Fantastic. Yeah. What's one book that you'd recommend to our audience and why? You can say more than one, actually.
Yeah. I would say I love people thinking differently. I listen to a lot of podcasts. Mm-hmm. So, right now I'm loving Rich Roll. He has a book called Finding Ultra. It's about transforming his life at, 40. He realized he was winded walking up the steps. And then he became one of the world's kind of fittest ultra marathoners. And I have a lot of interests outside of work. So, spirituality is one. Love Rob Bell. He has one called the Robcast. So his podcast is good. And this HR Leaders.
Thanks for us in there.
Your podcast. So,
thanks a lot. Well, that leads us nicely onto the next question, because the next question was going to be what online resources do you use for your own learning and development, which is where normally the podcasts jump up. In terms of your own learning and your own personal development, outside of the podcast, is there any sort of media outlets or online resources that you tap into that you could share?
Definitely the podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to Audible. Books on tape in the car and when I'm working out. So those are big pieces. LinkedIn, I find that's my go-to for not only talent, but also I just love the original thoughts people are putting out there. There's a lot of great things on there. So
yeah, you basically just described, if someone asked me that question, I would have basically just given them the exact same response as you. And I think the reason that podcasts are for me is just the way I can consume while still doing other activities, kind of how you described. Whether I'm riding my bike to work, I'm achieving more in the same amount of time. I'm both traveling to work and also I'm consuming great insights and knowledge. I'm working out and I'm also learning. So it's the combination of both, where pretty hard to ride your bike with a book. Fantastic. Well, look, thanks you again for taking the time to join us. Before we wrap up, 2 things. One, if there's a parting piece of guidance you could give to the leaders out there, what would that be? 2, if they want to reach out to you, say hello, connect with you, where's the best place for them to do so?
I would say each of us are an individual and keep learning, never stop learning, and continue to ask why. That. Just remind yourself of that. Why are we doing that way? So continue to do that. Do what you're doing. You got to this place for a reason. And then to reach out to me is LinkedIn. I mean, that's really for those of us in HR. I mean, that's where I think we connect. So feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Well, guys, as always, if you head over to hrleaders.com, you'll find the show notes for an episode. Everything we've been talking about today, everything Donovan will be sharing will be linked in the description and on the website for you guys. Donovan, thanks again for taking the time out to join us. And I wish you all the best until we next speak.
Thanks, Chris. I'll talk to you later.